Emilia stood alone in the grand study of the Montoya mansion, a room overflowing with opulence she could only dream of. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, glinting off crystal chandeliers and gilded picture frames. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the heavy leather-bound books on the shelf. The Montoyas had an insatiable appetite for luxury, but their disdain for those who made their lives possible was equally boundless. As Emilia bent down to sweep under the massive oak desk, her hand brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. Curious, she unfolded it, revealing a colorful lottery ticket. The numbers were barely legible through the smudges, but something about it made her pause. She had seen this ticket before. Isabella Montoya had mentioned it offhandedly during a conversation with Victor earlier that week, laughing at how it was probably worthless. Just another waste of time, Isabella had sneered. These things are for desperate people. Emilia tucked the ticket into her apron pocket without a second thought, intending to discard it later. But something gnawed at her as she worked through the rest of her chores. When her break finally arrived, she retrieved the ticket and pulled out her old phone, its cracked screen barely displaying the lottery website. With trembling fingers, she entered the numbers. Her heart stopped. Every number matched. For a moment, she sat frozen, her mind spinning. Could this really be happening? She glanced around the quiet servants' quarters as if someone might catch her in the act. But she was alone, save for the distant hum of the mansion's air conditioning. The ticket was worth $20 million. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. She envisioned Matteo, her younger brother, no longer gasping for breath in a rundown clinic but receiving the care he desperately needed. She saw herself leaving the Montoya's suffocating grip, walking away from their biting insults and condescending smirks forever. But as quickly as the hope blossomed, guilt crept in. The ticket wasn't hers. It belonged to the Montoyas, didn't it? Even if they treated her as invisible, she was still working in their home. They had likely purchased it with the excess cash they carelessly tossed at anything that amused them. Emilia's break ended before she could come to a decision. Tucking the ticket back into her pocket, she returned to her duties, her thoughts spinning like a carousel. The Montoyas never noticed her, she reminded herself. Perhaps they wouldn't even realize the ticket was gone. That evening, the Montoyas hosted a small gathering as they often did, filling their home with the sounds of clinking glasses and shallow laughter. Emilia moved silently through the throng, serving drinks and tidying as unnoticed as a shadow. At one point, she overheard Victor's booming voice. "Can you believe it? I had the winning ticket in my hand and lost it," he exclaimed, laughing loudly, though there was a trace of unease in his tone. Isabella rolled her eyes. "Typical. You're always so careless." Emilia's stomach tightened. They knew. The ticket wasn't some forgotten whim, it was a key to solving the financial troubles they so carefully concealed from the outside world. If they realized she had it, there would be no mercy. Later that night, in the solitude of her small room in the servants' quarters, Emilia stared at the ticket. Her hands trembled as she held it up to the light. She had a choice to make: return it and continue enduring a life of humiliation, or hold on to it and take a chance at freedom, for herself and Matteo. As tears blurred her vision, Emilia whispered to herself, what would they do if the roles were reversed? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The Montoya mansion buzzed with an unfamiliar tension the next morning. Emilia could feel it in the hurried footsteps of the staff, in Isabella Montoya's clipped instructions, and in the curt exchanges between Victor and their children, Sebastian and Camila. Something was different, and Emilia knew exactly what it was: the missing lottery ticket. Her hands shook as she polished the silverware in the dining room. She caught snippets of conversation as the Montoyas argued in the adjoining parlor. "I'm telling you it was here," Victor's voice thundered, frustration seeping into every syllable. "I left it on the desk in the study." "You leave everything in the study," Isabella retorted, her tone sharp. "And then you forget about it. Maybe it's buried under one of your piles of junk?" Victor let out a growl of irritation. "Isabella, do you realize what we've lost? That ticket was our chance to fix everything." "Lower your voice," Isabella hissed, glancing around as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. "Do you want the staff to know how bad things are? That we're one step away from losing the mansion?" Emilia froze. So the rumors were true. The Montoyas, the seemingly untouchable elite of San Gabriel, were drowning in debt. Her chest tightened. The ticket wasn't just a frivolous purchase for them, it was a lifeline. The day dragged on, each moment more suffocating than the last. As Emilia moved from room to room, she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching her. Her guilt painted every glance from the other staff as suspicious, every casual comment as an accusation. During lunch, she sat alone in the tiny servants' dining area, picking at her food. Maria, one of the older maids, leaned over. "You look pale, Nina," Maria said, her voice laced with concern. "Are you feeling all right?" Emilia nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, that's all." Maria gave her a skeptical look but didn't press further. Still, Emilia felt as though her secret were written across her face. She excused herself early and returned to her tasks, her heart pounding with every passing second. That evening, Victor announced that he had hired a private investigator to track down the missing ticket. The news sent a ripple of unease through the household staff. "It's ridiculous," muttered Jorge the groundskeeper as he smoked a cigarette outside the kitchen door. "They lose something and think one of us must have stolen it." Emilia, listening from the shadows, felt her stomach churn. What if they searched her room? What if they found the ticket? Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. When the investigator arrived the next morning, the staff were summoned one by one for questioning. Emilia sat in her room, clutching the edges of her chair as the minutes ticked by. Her turn finally came and she walked into the study with trembling legs. The investigator, a sharp-eyed man in a crisp suit, gestured for her to sit. His voice was calm, almost kind, but his gaze felt like a scalpel. "Miss Emilia," he began, flipping open a small notebook. "I'm sure you've heard about the missing ticket. Do you have any idea where it might be?" "No, sir," Emilia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't." "You work in the study often, yes?" he pressed. "Yes, sir," she said, trying to keep her breathing steady. "But I didn't see anything unusual." The investigator studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That will be all for now." Emilia stood and walked out of the study, her knees weak. She knew she couldn't keep the ticket hidden forever. The walls felt as though they were closing in on her. As night fell, Emilia sat on her small bed, staring at the crumpled ticket in her hands. Her mind was a storm of emotions: guilt, fear, hope. She thought of Mateo's pale face, his labored breathing, and his quiet determination to protect her from worrying about him. The money could save his life, change his future. But at what cost? Just as she was beginning to drift into an uneasy sleep, a knock sounded at her door. She sat up, heart racing. When she opened it, she found Sebastian standing there, his arms crossed and his piercing eyes fixed on her. "Do you have something you want to tell me, Emilia?" he asked, his voice low and unreadable. Emilia closed her door slowly, her heart pounding as she turned to face Sebastian Montoya. He leaned casually against the wall, but his sharp gaze pinned her in place. "I noticed you've been acting different," Sebastian said, his tone carefully measured. "Anything you'd like to share?" Her breath caught, but she quickly steadied herself. "I don't know what you mean, sir." He stepped closer, narrowing the distance between them. "You've always been quiet, Emilia, but lately you're more nervous than usual. And with the lottery ticket missing?" He let the implication hang in the air. Emilia forced herself to meet his gaze, masking her fear with as much calm as she could muster. "I'm just tired, Mr. Sebastian. The investigator asked me questions earlier, and it's been a long day." Sebastian studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Fair enough. But if there's anything you know, anything at all, you should come forward. You wouldn't want to get caught up in this mess." His words carried an unmistakable warning. As he left, Emilia collapsed onto her bed, clutching the lottery ticket hidden beneath her pillow. She couldn't let Sebastian or anyone else find out the truth. The next morning, Emilia woke early and ventured outside for a rare moment of solitude. The mansion's manicured garden stretched endlessly, but her eyes were drawn beyond the walls to the distant silhouette of Santa Rosa, the impoverished village where her family lived. Her thoughts drifted to Mateo, her younger brother. She hadn't seen him in months, but his voice echoed in her mind, soft and hopeful, even in the face of hardship. Mateo had been diagnosed with a severe respiratory condition that required constant care they could barely afford. Emilia's wages helped pay for his medication, but it was never enough. She remembered the nights they'd spent under the cracked roof of their small home, counting stars and dreaming of better days. "What would you do if you had $1 million, Emilia?" Mateo had once asked, his frail voice filled with wonder. She had laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "I'd make sure you never had to worry about anything again." Now that dream was within reach. But the price of making it a reality weighed heavily on her. Could she live with herself if she used the Montoya's ticket? Throughout the day, Emilia's imagination painted vivid pictures of what the lottery winnings could do. Mateo could receive the best medical care, perhaps even a chance at a normal life. She could finally leave the mansion, pursue her dream of becoming a nurse, and escape the endless cycle of servitude. But guilt lingered, a shadow that refused to be ignored. The Montoyas may have been cruel, but did that justify taking what was theirs? She thought of Isabella's biting remarks and Victor's condescending orders. Did they deserve sympathy? Or was this a twist of fate, an opportunity meant for her? That evening, as Emilia prepared for bed, she pulled a small box from under her mattress. Inside were a few treasured mementos: a faded photo of her family, a pair of Mateo's baby shoes, and an old bracelet her mother had given her before she passed away. She added the ticket to the box, her hands trembling as she closed the lid. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between hope and fear. For the first time, she allowed herself to envision a life beyond the mansion. A life where she wasn't invisible, where her voice mattered. She could almost hear Mateo laughing, his cheeks flushed with health as they walked through the streets of Santa Rosa, free at last from their struggles. But the vision dissolved as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the memory of Sebastian's warning. The Montoyas wouldn't stop searching for the ticket, and if they found it with her, the consequences would be devastating. In the middle of the night, Emilia sat up abruptly, her decision forming like steel in her mind. She had to protect Mateo no matter the cost. She had to find a way to use the ticket without exposing herself. Quietly, she gathered her belongings, slipping the small box into her bag. Her heart raced as she tiptoed to the door. Before she could open it, a noise in the hallway made her freeze. Someone was outside. The sound outside Emilia's door grew louder, footsteps steady and deliberate. She held her breath, her hand hovering over the latch. The hallway light seeped through the gap under the door, casting long shadows across her small room. Whoever was out there had stopped. Her heart pounded as a soft knock echoed against the wood. "Emilia?" It was Camila Montoya's voice, soft yet curious. Emilia hesitated, then opened the door a crack. Camila stood there in a silk robe, her hair falling in loose waves around her face. Unlike her parents and brother, Camila had always treated Emilia with a vague kindness, though it often felt more like pity. "I didn't mean to startle you," Camila said, offering a small smile. I wanted to check on you. You seemed off today." Emilia forced a smile in return. "I'm fine, miss. Just tired." Camila tilted her head, studying her. "It's been stressful around here with everything going on. My parents are losing their minds over that ticket." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You'd think it was the answer to all their problems?" Emilia nodded, saying nothing. Camila lingered for a moment longer, then sighed. "Well, get some rest. You look like you need it." As soon as Camila disappeared down the hall, Emilia locked her door and pressed her back against it, clutching the bag in her hands. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to act. The next morning, the mansion was a hive of activity. The private investigator had intensified his search, interrogating staff and even starting to inspect personal belongings. Emilia's anxiety mounted with every passing hour. She knew it was only a matter of time before they reached her room. By mid-afternoon, Victor Montoya was pacing the living room, barking orders at the staff. "Tear this place apart if you have to. That ticket is here somewhere and I want it found." Isabella, perched on the edge of a velvet armchair, sighed dramatically. "Honestly, Victor, it's probably long gone. Whoever took it is miles away by now." Sebastian, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, smirked. "Unless someone here decided to keep it for themselves?" His eyes flicked to Emilia, who was dusting a nearby shelf. She felt his gaze like a physical weight but kept her face neutral. That evening, Emilia finally managed to slip away to her small room. She opened her bag and retrieved the ticket, her hands shaking. She couldn't keep it here any longer, it was too dangerous. If the investigators searched her room, everything would be over. She needed a plan. As she sat on her bed, an idea began to form. There was a small cafe on the edge of San Gabriel where she knew the owner, Anna. Anna was discreet, trustworthy. Emilia could give her the ticket for safekeeping until she figured out her next steps. The thought brought a small measure of relief. Just as she was tucking the ticket back into her bag, there was a knock at her door. This time it wasn't soft or hesitant, it was sharp and insistent. "Open up, Emilia," came Victor's voice, cold and commanding. Her heart stopped. She scrambled to hide the ticket, shoving it under her mattress before opening the door. Victor, the investigator, and Sebastian stood in the doorway. Victor's expression was grim. "We're checking every room. Step aside." Emilia swallowed hard, stepping back as they entered. The investigator moved methodically, opening drawers, checking under the bed, rifling through her meager belongings. Emilia stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Sebastian lingered near her, his eyes never leaving her face. You seem nervous, Amelia, he said, his tone laced with suspicion. I have nothing to hide, she replied quietly, though her voice wavered. The investigator moved to the bed, lifting the mattress. Amelia's stomach churned, but her fear turned to shock when he pulled out an empty envelope. Victor snatched it from his hands, his face contorting in anger. What is this? I don't know, Amelia stammered, genuinely confused. Sebastian smirked, stepping closer. Looks like someone's been hiding something. But the envelope was empty. Whatever had been inside was gone. Victor glared at Amelia. You'd better pray we don't find evidence linking you to that ticket. The three men left and Amelia collapsed onto her bed, trembling. She reached under the mattress, and her fingers brushed the edge of something thin and crumpled. The ticket was still there. Her relief was short-lived. Someone else had been in her room. Someone had left the envelope, likely to frame her. But who? Late that night, Amelia snuck out of the mansion under the cover of darkness. The streets of San Gabriel were quiet, the distant hum of the city her only companion. She clutched her bag tightly, heading for the cafe where Anna worked. When she arrived, Anna greeted her with a warm smile, though her expression turned to concern as Amelia explained her predicament. Anna agreed to keep the ticket hidden, her steady presence a much-needed comfort. You're doing the right thing, Amelia, Anna said softly as she tucked the ticket into a locked box. But be careful. People like the Montoyas don't take kindly to losing. As Amelia left the cafe, the weight of the day's events bore down on her. The Montoyas wouldn't stop searching, and now someone within their circle seemed intent on sabotaging her. She had to be smarter, faster. Her future, and Mateo's, depended on it. The morning after hiding the ticket with Anna, Amelia returned to the Montoya mansion with a cautious sense of relief. Though she had bought herself time, the tension in the house had only escalated. Victor's anger boiled over into every interaction, while Isabella grew more withdrawn, spending her days pacing the grand parlor or berating the staff for imagined infractions. Meanwhile, Sebastian watched Amelia like a hawk, his suspicions undeterred. As Amelia resumed her chores, she noticed something odd in the study. The desk drawer, which Victor usually kept locked, had been left slightly ajar. A folder poked out from within, and despite her better judgment, she couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. Quickly glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching, she opened the drawer and pulled out the folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, contracts, and correspondence. Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages. The Montoya family was in deeper trouble than she had imagined. The papers revealed massive debts to creditors, overdue loans, and fraudulent investments under Victor's name. Even more shocking were records of Isabella's secret gambling losses. For years, the Montoyas had been hemorrhaging money to maintain their luxurious facade. As Amelia flipped through the papers, a letter fell to the floor. Picking it up, she read its contents with growing unease. It was a notice from the bank, warning of imminent foreclosure on the Montoya estate. The family wasn't just in trouble, they were on the brink of losing everything. Later that day, Amelia served tea in the parlor where Isabella sat, her porcelain cup trembling slightly in her hand. Sebastian lounged nearby, his phone in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. "Mother," Sebastian drawled, "perhaps you should tell Father to stop throwing money at private investigators. The ticket is gone. We should cut our losses." Isabella's eyes flashed with irritation. "That ticket is the only way to save this family, Sebastian. Or have you already resigned yourself to disgrace?" Sebastian smirked but said nothing. Amelia pretended not to hear as she set the tray down and retreated, her mind racing. The Montoyas were desperate, but desperation often led to dangerous decisions. She needed to tread carefully. That evening, Amelia slipped back into the study, unable to resist the urge to dig deeper. She returned to the folder, scanning its contents for anything that might explain how the Montoyas had spiraled into ruin. One document caught her eye, a series of emails exchanged between Victor and an anonymous party. The tone was cold and threatening, with the sender demanding repayment and hinting at retribution if the debt remained unpaid. Amelia's heart raced as she realized the Montoyas were entangled with dangerous people. The missing lottery ticket wasn't just about saving their estate, it was about survival. As she replaced the folder and prepared to leave, a voice startled her. "You're quite nosy for a housemaid." She spun around to find Sebastian leaning against the doorway, his arms crossed and a sly smile on his face. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I was cleaning," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry." Sebastian stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "Funny how often you seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It makes one wonder if you're hiding something." I don't know what you mean, Emilia replied, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Sebastian tilted his head, studying her. You're smarter than the others, Emilia. I'll give you that. But don't think for a second that you can outplay me. He leaned in, his voice a low whisper. If you know something about that ticket, you'd better come clean. My parents might forgive you, but I won't. He turned and left, leaving Emilia rooted to the spot. She knew now, without a doubt, that Sebastian wouldn't stop until he uncovered her secret. As the household settled into uneasy silence that night, Emilia slipped out once again, this time heading to Anna's cafe. She needed reassurance that the ticket was safe. Anna greeted her with a smile but quickly grew serious as Emilia recounted Sebastian's threats. You're playing a dangerous game, Emilia, Anna said, her voice filled with concern. If they find out what you've done? They won't, Emilia said firmly, though her own doubts gnawed at her. I won't let them. Anna retrieved the locked box from a cabinet and opened it to show Emilia the ticket inside. It's safe here, she said. But you need to decide what to do soon. This can't go on forever. Emilia nodded, her resolve hardening. She couldn't stay in the Montoya mansion much longer. The longer she lingered, the more danger she invited, not just for herself but for Matteo. She had to act, and soon. As Emilia returned to the mansion under the cover of darkness, she spotted a figure standing on the terrace. It was Isabella, her silhouette framed against the dim glow of the garden lights. Emilia paused, watching as the Montoya matriarch stared out into the night, clutching a glass of wine. Isabella's voice carried softly through the air. Do you ever feel like the walls are closing in? Emilia's breath hitched, but she didn't answer. Isabella turned slightly as if sensing her presence, but then shook her head and disappeared into the house. For the first time, Emilia glimpsed the cracks in the Montoya's armor, not just financial but personal. Their empire was crumbling, and with it, their carefully constructed identities. The weight of her discovery pressed heavily on Emilia as she lay in bed that night. The Montoya's secrets were unraveling, but so were her chances of staying unnoticed. She clutched the small bracelet from her keepsake box, whispering a promise to herself. For Matteo, she said aloud. This is all for Matteo. But deep down, she knew the path ahead would test her in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The Montoya mansion was a cauldron of simmering tension the following morning. Victor stormed through the halls, barking orders, while Isabella clung to her wine glass as though it were a lifeline. Sebastian, ever the opportunist, prowled like a predator, his sharp eyes scanning for any weakness to exploit. Emilia kept her head down, moving quickly and quietly, but her mind was ablaze with a single thought: she needed to act. That afternoon, as she scrubbed the kitchen counters, Camila appeared, her usually serene face etched with worry. She motioned for Emilia to follow her to the garden. Once there, Camila glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking. Emilia, she began softly, I need to ask you something. And I need the truth. Emilia's heart raced. What is it, Miss Camila? Camila hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. Do you know anything about the lottery ticket? I promise I won't tell anyone. I have to know. Emilia met her gaze, her stomach churning. Camila's tone was sincere, but trust was a luxury Emilia couldn't afford. No, Mississippi. I don't know anything. Camila searched Emilia's face for a moment before nodding, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Be careful, she said finally. Things are getting dangerous around here. As Camila walked away, Emilia clenched her fists. Camila's warning only reinforced what she already knew. The Montoyas were unraveling and she couldn't stay in their orbit any longer. That evening, Emilia packed her meager belongings into a small bag, her movements quick and deliberate. The plan was simple: leave the mansion under the cover of darkness, retrieve the ticket from Anna, and head to Santa Rosa to be with Matteo. Once she was safe, she would decide what to do with the winnings. She waited until the household was asleep before slipping out of her room. The corridors were eerily quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of a grandfather clock. Her heart pounded as she crept down the back staircase and toward the side door. Just as she reached for the handle, a voice stopped her in her tracks. Going somewhere, Emilia? She turned slowly to see Camila standing in the shadows, her arms crossed. There was no malice in her expression, only curiosity tinged with concern. I needed some air, Emilia stammered, her mind racing for an excuse. Camila stepped closer, her voice low. Don't lie to me. I know you're planning to leave. She paused, her eyes softening. I won't stop you. But you have to tell me, do you have the ticket? Emilia hesitated. She wanted to trust Camila, but the risks were too great. I don't, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Camila studied her for a long moment before sighing. Be careful, Emilia. Whatever you're doing, I hope it's worth it. Without another word, she stepped aside, allowing Emilia to slip out into the night. The streets of San Gabriel were deserted, the air cool and still. Emilia kept her head down as she hurried to Anna's cafe. When she arrived, Anna greeted her with a worried look. You shouldn't be out alone, Anna said, ushering Emilia inside and locking the door behind her. I don't have a choice, Emilia replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Do you have the ticket? Anna retrieved the locked box and handed it to Emilia. It's all here. Are you sure about this? Emilia nodded, though doubt lingered at the edges of her mind. I need to get to Santa Rosa. Matteo needs me. Anna gave her a tight hug. Be safe, Emilia. And whatever happens, don't let them take this from you. Emilia slipped the ticket into her bag and set off toward the bus station, her pulse quickening with every step. Freedom was so close she could taste it. As Emilia waited for the bus to arrive, her thoughts drifted to the Montoyas. She wondered how long it would take them to realize she was gone. Would they come after her? And if they did, would she have the strength to stand her ground? Her musings were interrupted by the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Relief flooded her as the bus pulled into the station. She climbed aboard and sank into a seat, clutching her bag tightly to her chest. The bus rumbled to life, carrying her away from San Gabriel and toward the promise of a new beginning. For the first time in years, Emilia allowed herself to hope. But as the city lights faded into the distance, Emilia couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was far from over. The Montoyas wouldn't give up so easily, and the shadows of their influence loomed large. She glanced out the window, her resolve hardening. For Matteo, she whispered to herself. This is all for Matteo. Little did she know, the storm brewing behind her was closer than she realized. The bus jolted to a stop on the outskirts of Santa Rosa, the small village Emilia had once called home. She stepped off, her bag clutched tightly to her chest, and inhaled the familiar scent of earth and wood smoke. The modest houses and winding dirt paths were a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Montoya mansion, but here the air felt lighter. Emilia hurried toward the tiny clinic where Matteo was being treated. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. She hadn't told Matteo she was coming, and her sudden appearance would likely spark questions. Questions she wasn't ready to answer. Inside the clinic, Matteo sat propped up on a thin mattress, his face pale but his eyes bright as he read from an old, tattered book. When he looked up and saw Emilia, his expression lit up. Emilia, he exclaimed, his voice weak but filled with joy. What are you doing here? She dropped her bag and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to press too hard against his fragile frame. I couldn't stay away, she whispered. I've missed you. Matteo pulled back, studying her face. You look tired. Are you okay? I'm fine, Emilia replied, forcing a smile. How are you? Have the doctors been taking good care of you? Matteo shrugged. They do their best. But we both know the medicine is expensive. Emilia's grip on his hand tightened. Don't worry about that anymore. I'm going to make sure you get everything you need. Matteo's brow furrowed, but he didn't press further. You always take care of me, he said softly. That evening, Emilia met with Dr. Vargas, the village's only physician, in his cramped office. The walls were lined with medical textbooks and jars of faded herbs, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Matteo's condition is stable for now, Dr. Vargas explained, but he needs better care than we can provide here. A specialist in San Miguel could help, but the treatment is costly. Emilia nodded, her resolve firm. I'll pay for it. Whatever it takes. Dr. Vargas raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? This isn't a small expense. I have the means, Emilia said, her voice steady. I just need time to arrange everything. As she left the clinic, Emilia felt the weight of her promise pressing down on her. The lottery winnings could save Matteo, but claiming them without exposing herself to the Montoya's wrath was another matter entirely. The next morning, Emilia visited Anna's cousin, a lawyer named Raul in a neighboring town. Anna had insisted that Emilia seek legal advice before attempting to cash the ticket, and Raul was discreet and experienced. Raul examined the ticket carefully, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. This is the real deal, he said finally, placing it back on the table. But claiming a prize this large will attract attention, especially if the Montoyas are looking for it. Emilia's stomach churned. Is there a way to claim it anonymously? Raul leaned back in his chair, considering. There are ways to shield your identity, but it's complicated. It would involve setting up a trust or appointing a representative to collect on your behalf. And even then there's a risk. Emilia nodded slowly. Do whatever it takes. I need this money to help my brother. Raoul tapped his pen against the table. All right. I'll draw up the necessary documents, but I need you to be prepared. If the Montoyas find out, they won't go quietly. Back in Santa Rosa, Emilia began to feel the stirrings of unease. News traveled fast in small villages, and her sudden return had not gone unnoticed. One evening, as she walked home from the clinic, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a lamppost, Sebastian Montoya. Her heart dropped. Sebastian straightened as she approached, his smile cold and calculating. Fancy running into you here, Emilia? What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. I could ask you the same, he replied. But I think I already know the answer. Emilia's fingers tightened around her bag. I don't know what you're talking about. Sebastian stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. I know you have the ticket, Emilia. Hand it over and we can end this right now. Emilia forced herself to stay calm. You're mistaken. I don't have anything. Sebastian laughed softly, shaking his head. You're a terrible liar. But I'll give you one chance to make this right. Return what belongs to my family, or I'll make sure you regret it. He turned and walked away, leaving Emilia trembling in his wake. That night, Emilia sat in the small kitchen of her family's house, staring at the lottery tickets spread out on the table. Her mind raced with questions and fears. Sebastian was closing in and her time was running out. She had come so far, but the finish line still seemed impossibly distant. Matteo shuffled into the room, rubbing his eyes. Emilia? What are you doing up? She quickly slid the ticket into her bag, forcing a smile. Just thinking. Matteo sat beside her, his expression serious. You're scared, aren't you? Emilia hesitated, then nodded. But I'm doing this for you, Matteo. For us. He reached out and took her hand, his small fingers warm against hers. You've always been brave. Don't let them take that away from you. His words filled her with renewed determination. No matter what Sebastian or the Montoyas did, she wouldn't give up. This was her fight and she intended to win. The morning sun cast long shadows over Santa Rosa as Emilia prepared for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. Sebastian's threat lingered in her mind, but fear was no longer her guiding force. She had something more powerful now, purpose. She secured the lottery ticket in the folds of her bag, hiding it beneath a bundle of Matteo's clothes. Then, after making sure Matteo was safe at the clinic, she set out toward the town square, where rumors of a Montoya gathering had reached her ears. In the center of the square, Victor and Isabella Montoya stood near their car, flanked by Sebastian and a few of their associates. Their tailored clothing and haughty expressions clashed with the humble surroundings, and their presence drew wary glances from the townsfolk. Emilia stepped into the square, her heart pounding but her chin held high. The murmurs of the crowd hushed as she approached. Sebastian spotted her first, a smirk curling his lips. Well, look who's decided to join us, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Victor turned, his face darkening. You've caused us enough trouble, Emilia. Hand over the ticket, and this ends here. Emilia met his gaze, her voice steady. You mean the ticket you plan to use to cover up your crimes? A gasp rippled through the crowd. Victor's eyes narrowed and Isabella's grip on her handbag tightened. What are you talking about? Isabella snapped, though her voice faltered. Emilia reached into her bag and pulled out the folder of incriminating documents she had taken from the Montoya mansion. She held it high, her voice ringing out across the square. These are the Montoya's secrets, proof of their fraud, their debts, and the lives they've ruined to maintain their wealth. The crowd stirred, whispers turning into murmurs of outrage. Victor stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he growled. Hand those over now. Emilia stood her ground. No. The truth deserves to be known. Sebastian lunged forward, grabbing for the folder, but Emilia was quicker. She sidestepped his advance, raising her voice to address the crowd. This family has built their empire on the suffering of others. And now they're trying to steal from me, the only chance I have to save my brother's life. Her words struck a chord with the onlookers. Several stepped closer, forming a protective barrier between Emilia and the Montoyas. You're nothing but a thief, Isabella hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Emilia turned to face her. I'm no thief. I worked for your family for years, enduring your insults and humiliation, while you squandered everything you had. That ticket might have been yours once, but you lost it, just like you've lost everything else. Victor's composure snapped. You'll regret this, he spat, advancing on her. Before he could reach her, a man stepped between them. Raoul, the lawyer Emilia had confided in. He raised his hand, signaling for silence. "This ends now," Raoul declared, his voice firm. "I've reviewed the documents and the lottery claim. Emilia is within her rights to collect the prize. And if any harm comes to her or her family, the Montoyas will face legal consequences." The Montoyas recoiled as if struck. Victor's face turned ashen and Sebastian clenched his fists in frustration. The crowd erupted in support of Emilia, their voices drowning out the Montoyas' protests. Victor and Isabella retreated to their car, their pride shattered. Sebastian lingered for a moment, his cold eyes fixed on Emilia. "This isn't over," he said quietly before turning to follow his parents. Emilia watched them go, her chest heaving with adrenaline. The villagers surrounded her, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. For the first time in years she felt seen, not as a servant, but as a person who had fought for what was right. That evening, back at the clinic, Emilia handed the lottery ticket to Raoul. He assured her that he would finalize the claim discreetly, ensuring her safety and protecting her identity. As he left, Emilia sat by Matteo's bedside, her heart heavy but hopeful. "You did it, didn't you?" Matteo asked, his voice soft but filled with admiration. Emilia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not over yet, but we're closer." Matteo smiled, his small hand reaching for hers. "You're the bravest person I know." Emilia leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I did this for you," she whispered. "For us." In the days that followed, Emilia used a portion of the lottery winnings to arrange Matteo's transfer to a state-of-the-art hospital in San Miguel. She also began laying the groundwork for a foundation to support domestic workers like herself, those who had been overlooked and mistreated for far too long. Meanwhile, the Montoyas empire continued to crumble. News of their financial crimes spread, leaving them ostracized and disgraced. They sold their mansion and disappeared from the public eye, shadows of their former selves. The bustling streets of San Miguel stood in stark contrast to the quiet village of Santa Rosa. Emilia marveled at the towering hospital where Matteo was now receiving the best care money could provide. Watching him sleep peacefully in a private room, free from the constant pain that had plagued him for years, brought a deep sense of relief. For the first time in her life, Emilia allowed herself to believe that the future could be bright. Weeks passed, and Emilia's life began to transform in ways she had only dreamed of. With the guidance of Raoul, she claimed the lottery prize under a carefully constructed trust, ensuring her anonymity. The funds not only secured Matteo's treatment but also gave Emilia the chance to pursue her education. She enrolled in a nursing program in San Miguel, her heart set on helping others the way she had always dreamed. But Emilia's vision went beyond her personal ambitions. She couldn't forget the years of humiliation and exploitation she had endured as a domestic worker. Inspired by her own journey, she began to organize a foundation to support workers like herself, those who had been overlooked, undervalued, and mistreated. The foundation, aptly named Horizons for All, launched with little fanfare but quickly gained traction. Emilia used a portion of her winnings to establish scholarships for education and vocational training, ensuring that domestic workers had the tools to build better futures. She worked tirelessly, meeting with government officials, community leaders, and other advocates to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. One afternoon, Emilia visited a small community center in Santa Rosa, where her foundation was hosting its first event. The room buzzed with excitement as workers from the village and nearby towns gathered to learn about the resources now available to them. Emilia stood at the front of the room, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For years, I believed my worth was defined by the opinions of those who looked down on me. But I've learned that dignity isn't something anyone can take away. It's something we carry within us, and it grows stronger when we lift each other up." The crowd erupted in applause, their faces alight with hope. Emilia's heart swelled as she looked out at them. This was what she had fought for, not just for herself and Matteo but for everyone who had been told they were less than they deserved to be. Back in San Miguel, Matteo's recovery continued to progress. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his laughter once again filled the room. One evening, as they shared dinner in his hospital room, Matteo reached for Emilia's hand. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said, grinning up at her. Emilia chuckled, ruffling his hair. "I just did what I had to do." Matteo shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You changed everything." His words lingered in Emilia's mind long after he fell asleep. For so long she had felt powerless, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. But now she realized that power wasn't about wealth or status, it was about using what you had to make a difference. Meanwhile, the Montoyas' downfall was complete. Their financial crimes had come to light, leading to legal battles and public disgrace. Victor and Isabella fled San Gabriel, while Sebastian attempted to reinvent himself in a distant city, far from the shadows of his family's shame. The once grand Montoya mansion stood empty, a crumbling relic of a bygone era. Emilia heard whispers of its decay but paid them no mind. Her focus was on the future, not the ghosts of her past. As the months turned into a year, Emilia completed her first semester of nursing school with top marks. The foundation continued to grow, with branches opening in neighboring towns and cities. Emilia's story became a quiet inspiration to those who heard it, though she never sought the spotlight. One day, as she walked through the bustling streets of San Miguel, she stopped to admire a small bookstore window displaying a framed quote. "Empowerment isn't given, it's claimed, earned, and shared." The words resonated deeply. Emilia smiled, adjusting the bag on her shoulder as she continued on her way. There was still so much to do, but she welcomed the challenge. 2 years had passed since Emilia first stumbled upon the lottery ticket that changed her life. Standing at the edge of Santa Rosa's bustling main square, she marveled at how much had transformed, not just for her but for the community she had left behind. The small village now buzzed with opportunity. A new vocational training center had opened, funded by her foundation, and young people filled the streets with hope instead of resignation. Emilia's path had not been without challenges. Her journey through nursing school had demanded every ounce of her determination, but she had thrived, graduating with honors. Mateo's health had improved dramatically thanks to the care she could now afford. He had even begun attending school again, something neither of them had dared to dream about during the hardest years. Today, Emilia stood before the crowd gathered at the official opening of the Horizons for All Regional Training Center. A podium had been erected in the middle of the square, and villagers from miles around had come to celebrate the occasion. She adjusted the microphone, her heart pounding as she prepared to speak. "I was once afraid to hope," Emilia began, her voice steady despite the weight of her emotions. "I thought the world would always see me as small, as invisible. But life taught me something different. It taught me that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about standing up, even when your voice shakes." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Emilia smiled, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. She recognized many of them, women she had worked beside, children she had once helped look after, and even Anna, who had stood by her through the darkest days. After the ceremony, Emilia took a quiet moment to herself. She wandered through the fields on the outskirts of Santa Rosa, her feet treading familiar paths. In the distance, she could see the outline of the Montoya mansion, now little more than a husk of its former grandeur. Overgrown with vines and weathered by time, it stood as a stark reminder of how quickly power could fade. She approached the gates and paused, letting the memories wash over her. The humiliation, the fear, and the hopelessness she had felt in that house seemed almost surreal now. But Emilia wasn't bitter. The Montoya's cruelty had been a catalyst for her growth, and she had emerged stronger, more determined to create a life of purpose. "For so long this place felt like a prison," she said softly to herself. "But now it's just a memory." With one last glance at the crumbling mansion, Emilia turned and walked away, her steps light and free. That evening, back in San Miguel, Emilia celebrated quietly with Mateo and a small group of friends. The modest apartment they now called home was filled with laughter and the aroma of a homemade feast. Mateo, his cheeks flushed with health, raised a glass of sparkling apple juice in a toast. To Emilia, he declared, his voice full of pride. "The bravest sister in the world." Emilia laughed, though her eyes shimmered with tears. "To us," she corrected, raising her own glass. "To everything we've built together." As the night wound down, Emilia found herself alone on the small balcony, gazing out at the glittering city lights. Her journey had been anything but easy, but she had learned that strength came not from wealth or power but from resilience, love, and the courage to dream. She closed her eyes and let the cool breeze wash over her, carrying with it the voices of the community she had fought so hard to uplift. Emilia was no longer the invisible maid who had been dismissed and demeaned. She was a symbol of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when one refused to be defined by their circumstances. What would you have done in Emilia's place? Would you have taken the lottery ticket, or would you have returned it to the Montoyas? If this story inspired you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and share with others who believe in the power of resilience and justice.